It all began the moment I stepped into my new apartment, an old, creaky place I had rented without giving it much thought. From the outside, it looked like any other building, but something about it felt off. The kind of feeling you get when shadows linger just a little too long, or when silence suddenly grows too heavy. I brushed it off at first, maybe the wear of the building, maybe my imagination. But I was wrong. Just days after moving in, I found something that would change everything, a diary. It wasn't where you'd expect, a hidden nook or behind a loose brick, but tucked away inside a hollowed-out space beneath the floorboards in my bedroom. The diary was old, the leather cover cracked and dusty, like it had been waiting, forgotten, for years. Holding it in my hands, I wondered, who left it here? Why? What secrets did it hold? And most importantly, what should I do with it? The first few pages seemed harmless, like a regular journal filled with everyday thoughts. But as I kept reading, I realized this was no ordinary diary. The entries grew darker, filled with strange, unsettling experiences. Things that made me question my own safety in this apartment. Things that made me wish I had never opened it. What kind of story was this diary telling? Was it just a product of a disturbed mind, or something more sinister? And why did I feel like the diary's story wasn't over, that it was somehow reaching out to me? If you've ever found something that shouldn't have been found, you know the mix of fear and curiosity that takes over. This diary pulled me deep into a world I never wanted to enter. And now, I'm sharing that experience with you, every chilling detail, every unanswered question, every moment I wished I could turn back time. So, if you're ready, lean in close, turn down the lights, and listen carefully. Because some stories aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to haunt you. I couldn't stop thinking about that diary. After the initial shock of finding it, I had to know more. So, one evening, I cleared off my small bedroom floor, sat down carefully, and opened the diary again. The leather was rough beneath my fingers, the pages yellowed and brittle, but surprisingly well preserved. There was a faint, musty smell, like old paper and something else I couldn't place. As I flipped through the pages, the handwriting caught my attention. It was neat, almost meticulous, but uneven, like the writer was struggling to keep control. Sometimes the words would trail off, sometimes they'd be crossed out and rewritten. It felt raw, urgent. Like a confession made in secret. But what really unsettled me was where I found it. The space under the floorboards wasn't obvious, it took some effort to pry up a loose plank, and the small cavity beneath was dusty, covered in cobwebs. It was a place no one would look twice. Whoever left the diary wanted it hidden. Why? And for how long had it been buried there? The next pages were the first I actually read properly that night. They started out like any normal diary, daily notes about the writer's life, the people they met, their routines. But even then, something felt off. The writer mentioned odd sounds at night, whispers just out of earshot, shadows moving in corners of their eyes. At first, they shrugged it off. Maybe it's just the old building settling, they wrote. But the way the words were written, I could feel the unease beneath the surface. As I read, the apartment around me seemed to grow quieter. The ticking of the old clock on the wall, the faint hum of the street outside, it all faded away as I became absorbed in the diary's world. I could almost hear the whispers, almost feel those shadows. Then, there was a page that stopped me cold. A quick note scrawled in the margin, barely legible, "They watch." Always watching. No name, no explanation. Just those chilling words. I shivered, but kept reading. The diary was pulling me deeper into a story I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The more I read, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a diary, it was a record of fear. Fear that grew into something far worse. Strange occurrences, paranoia, and a growing sense of danger that the writer couldn't escape. At one point, the writer mentioned trying to leave the apartment, but something held them back, something invisible and heavy, like a weight pressing down on their chest. That line stuck with me. It made me look around the room I was sitting in and wonder, was I feeling it too? By the time I closed the diary that night, I was shaking. But I couldn't put it away. I needed to know more. What had happened to this person? What was watching them? And could whatever it was still be here, lurking in the shadows of my own apartment? The first real pages of the diary felt almost normal, like a glimpse into someone's daily life, except with a slow, creeping sense that something was wrong beneath the surface. The writer, whose name I never found, described simple routines, waking up early, making coffee, small talk with neighbors, the mundane details that make up a normal day. But every so often, between the lines, subtle clues hinted at a growing darkness. One entry described a neighbor named Mr. Harris, a quiet man who rarely spoke but whose eyes seemed to follow the writer wherever they went. The writer mentioned feeling uneasy around him, but didn't explain why. There was a line that stuck with me: sometimes I catch him standing outside my door, staring. When I look up, he's gone. But I know he's there. That wasn't the kind of paranoia you shrug off easily. Other entries talked about strange noises in the apartment at night, soft tapping, footsteps, or whispers that sounded like voices speaking just out of reach. The writer tried to ignore them, blaming creaky pipes or the wind. But the tone changed over time, becoming more tense, more desperate. What caught me most was how the diary showed the writer's mental state unraveling bit by bit. One page was just a jumble of frantic words, crossed out lines, and repeated phrases like, "can't trust anyone," and "they're watching." The contrast between the neat, calm handwriting from earlier pages and this chaos was jarring. As I read, I pictured the writer sitting alone in their apartment, haunted by these noises and the feeling of being watched. It reminded me of the nights I had spent in the apartment, when the silence felt too loud and every shadow seemed alive. The diary mentioned a friend named Lisa, someone the writer trusted. But even that relationship felt strained, with hints that Lisa might not be what she seemed. There was a passage where the writer described finding Lisa acting strangely, her eyes distant, her voice cold. The writer wrote, "I don't know if I can trust her anymore. She's hiding something." That raised more questions than answers. As the entries went on, the apartment itself seemed to become a character, a place that was alive, hostile, and dangerous. The writer spoke of doors locking on their own, cold spots in rooms, and objects moving without explanation. These weren't the typical haunted house tropes, though. The fear felt personal, like the apartment was targeting the writer, squeezing tighter around them. There was an entry where the writer described a night they woke up to find all the mirrors covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like red paint, or maybe something worse. The fear in their words was raw. "I don't know who did this. I'm scared to look in the mirror now." That line made my own skin crawl. But the diary wasn't just about fear. It also showed moments of hope, of the writer trying to fight back. There were plans to move out, phone calls to landlords, even notes about researching the apartment's history. However, those hopeful entries became fewer and farther between, replaced by growing despair. One entry mentioned an old rumor about the building, a story of a tenant who disappeared years ago without a trace. No one knew what happened, and no one talked about it. The writer was obsessed with finding out more, convinced the truth was buried somewhere beneath the apartment's creaky floors. By the time I finished these first real entries, I felt like I was no longer just reading a diary. I was stepping into the writer's world, feeling their fear, their confusion, and their mounting terror. And the scariest part? The more I read, the more I wondered if this story was far from over. As I dove deeper into the diary, the entries became harder to read, not just because of the increasingly frantic handwriting, but because of what they described. Strange occurrences that went beyond mere unsettling noises or odd feelings. The writer was living through something unnatural. One night, the diary described a chilling event. The writer woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps pacing outside their bedroom door. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped and started again, over and over. When they finally mustered the courage to open the door, there was no one there. Just an empty, silent hallway. The words they wrote stayed with me. it's like the apartment is breathing, alive, watching me every second. I couldn't help but compare this to my own experience since moving in. There were nights when the apartment felt suffocating, when every creak and groan echoed like a warning. But reading it from the writer's perspective, the fear felt more vivid, almost contagious. The diary also described the feeling of being watched, not just by a person, but by something else. A presence that lingered in the corners of the room, unseen but deeply felt. The writer mentioned cold spots that would appear suddenly, like invisible ice chilling the air, and shadows that didn't match the light. One particularly disturbing entry talked about waking up with scratches on their arms, scratches they swore weren't there before they went to bed. The writer didn't know if it was sleepwalking or something else entirely. "I'm scared I'm losing my mind," they confessed, "but what if it's worse? What if I'm not alone?" There were repeated mentions of a sense of paranoia taking over, looking over their shoulder constantly, locking doors multiple times, jumping at every noise. The diary painted a picture of someone trapped in a nightmare that was slowly bleeding into reality. One entry stood out because it was written in almost a whisper, short sentences, fragmented thoughts. The writer described hearing voices, soft whispers that spoke in a language they didn't understand but felt familiar, like a warning or a curse. They said the voices would call their name, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening. As the entries went on, the writer's grip on reality seemed to slip. They questioned their own memories, unsure what was real and what was imagined. At one point, they wrote about seeing figures at the edge of their vision, dark shapes that vanished when looked at directly. The diary also included sketches, rough, eerie drawings of these figures, strange symbols, and the layout of the apartment with marks in places the writer thought were significant. The images were crude but haunting, adding another layer of mystery to the story. Despite the growing fear, the writer clung to hope. There were notes about trying rituals, lighting candles, even calling local spiritual advisors. None of it worked. The presence in the apartment only seemed to grow stronger. I started feeling the weight of the story myself. The diary wasn't just telling me what happened, it was pulling me into the experience. I caught myself checking the corners of my own room, feeling like I was being watched. One night, after reading an especially disturbing entry, I woke up to a noise, something tapping lightly on my bedroom window. My heart pounded. I told myself it was nothing, just a branch or the wind. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. The diary ended this section with a desperate note: "If anyone finds this, beware. This place is not what it seems. They don't want you to leave." The diary's tone shifted sharply as I reached the entries that unveiled the dark secret lurking beneath the surface. What had started as unsettling noises and vague fears became something far more sinister, something that gripped the writer in a terrifying truth they couldn't escape. The secret involved someone close to the writer, a person whose presence twisted the nightmare into a personal horror. The diary revealed hints about a trusted friend who wasn't what they seemed. Lisa, the friend mentioned earlier, took center stage now. The writer's words painted her in a disturbing new light. At first, Lisa was a source of comfort, someone the writer leaned on during the growing terror. But then came the unsettling realization: Lisa might be involved in the darkness haunting the apartment. The writer described overhearing strange conversations when alone, cryptic phrases whispered behind closed doors, and glances that felt more like threats. One entry chillingly detailed a confrontation. The writer caught Lisa in the act of drawing the same eerie symbols that had appeared on the mirrors. Lisa's eyes were cold and distant, almost empty. When confronted, she simply smiled and said, "You don't understand. It's not what you think." The writer was left terrified, confused, and isolated. The diary made it clear that Lisa wasn't just a friend, she was part of the mystery, part of the apartment's dark history. The writer hinted that Lisa might be connected to the tenant who disappeared years ago, the one the writer had tried to uncover before. There was an implication that Lisa knew more than she let on, maybe even played a role in the disappearance. The entries grew frantic as the writer tried to piece together the truth. They described finding secret rooms hidden behind walls, discovering symbols etched into the floorboards, and hearing chilling chants late at night. Lisa's involvement deepened the horror. Was she a victim, a villain, or something worse? One particularly haunting entry described the writer following Lisa to a hidden basement beneath the building. There, they saw a disturbing scene, a circle of symbols glowing faintly in the dark, objects arranged ritualistically, and Lisa standing silently in the center, eyes closed, whispering words that made the air feel thick and heavy. The writer's fear exploded into panic. They tried to leave, but the apartment seemed to fight back. Doors slammed shut, windows locked themselves, and shadows swirled like living things. The diary described the writer's desperate attempts to escape, only to be pulled back by forces they couldn't explain. What struck me most was the sense of betrayal. Lisa wasn't just an outsider, she was someone the writer had trusted deeply. The diary showed how trust turned to suspicion, and suspicion spiraled into terror. The relationship between them was tangled in secrets and lies, and that tension added a raw, emotional layer to the horror. The diary's entries revealed that Lisa wasn't acting alone. There were hints of a group, a secret society tied to the apartment's history, responsible for rituals and disappearances. The writer was caught in the middle of something much bigger and darker than they could handle. As I read, I felt my own heart race. The story wasn't just about an old diary, it was about trust broken, evil lurking beneath familiar faces, and the nightmare that follows when you realize the people closest to you might be the most dangerous. The diary ended this section with a chilling line, "I don't know who to trust anymore. If Lisa is part of this, is anyone safe? I'm running out of time." The final entries in the diary were the most chilling of all. They read like a countdown, each page heavier with desperation and fear. The writer was running out of time, trapped in a nightmare that seemed to close in tighter with every passing day. One entry began with shaky handwriting, barely legible, "They're here. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." The words echoed with pure terror, a sharp contrast to the earlier notes that had tried to stay hopeful. The writer described strange shadows moving through the apartment in full view, but whenever they tried to point them out, the shadows vanished like smoke. No one else could see what was happening, which made the writer question their sanity even more. In these final pages, Lisa's presence felt omnipresent and sinister. The writer wrote about hearing her whispering in empty rooms, or catching glimpses of her figure in the corners of their vision. The trust was completely shattered. One entry described a night where the writer was locked inside the apartment, unable to open any doors or windows no matter how hard they tried. The atmosphere was thick with fear and a suffocating silence, broken only by distant, echoing chants that seemed to seep through the walls. The writer's final words were a frantic plea for help, "If anyone finds this diary, please believe me, there is something evil here. Something that feeds on fear and trust. I don't know if I'll make it out alive." I closed the diary with a cold sweat. The sense of urgency and horror was overwhelming, as if the writer's fear was reaching across time and space, dragging me into their nightmare. But the story didn't end there. After reading those last entries, I started noticing strange things in my own apartment, noises when I was alone, whispers I couldn't explain, cold spots that chilled me to the bone. Was the diary warning me? Or was it a trap? I wasn't sure anymore. After finishing the diary, I thought the nightmare would be over. But that was just the beginning. The days that followed felt like I was living in a shadow of the writer's terror. The apartment seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I noticed small things at first, items moved slightly from where I left them, a whisper in the hallway just as I passed by, the sudden drop of temperature in certain rooms. One night, I woke up to a faint tapping on my bedroom window. My heart raced, but when I looked outside, there was nothing there. Just empty darkness. The silence afterward was even worse. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that reading the diary had just unsettled me too much. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. I reached out to the landlord to ask about the apartment's history. They were evasive, mentioning only vague stories about a tenant who disappeared years ago but refusing to give details. It was clear some secrets were being kept. Determined to find answers, I started researching on my own, old news articles, online forums, even Reddit threads about haunted apartments. Pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The building had a dark past, tied to disappearances and rumors of occult activity. Names kept popping up, some linked to that same mysterious group hinted at in the diary. Strangely, the more I learned, the more the apartment seemed to resist me. Doors would lock on their own, lights flickered, and sometimes I caught a glimpse of a shadow slipping just out of view. It was as if the apartment itself was alive, aware I was digging into its secrets. I also noticed changes in myself. At times, I felt paranoid and anxious, like I was being watched even when no one was there. Sleep became difficult, dreams were filled with dark symbols and faces I didn't recognize. I questioned my own sanity. One evening, while going through the diary again, I found a hidden note tucked between the pages, a message that hadn't been there before. It read, "You're not alone. They never forget." That was the moment I realized the diary wasn't just a record of past horrors. It was a warning. And somehow, it was reaching out to me. I don't know what will happen next. Part of me wants to leave the apartment, to run away from this place and its dark past. But another part feels trapped, like the writer felt, pulled into a story that refuses to end. So here I am, sharing this story with you. Maybe it's a way to exorcise the fear, or maybe it's a cry for help. All I know is that the diary's story didn't end when I closed its cover. It's alive in this apartment, in the shadows, in the silence. If you ever find something like this, something hidden and forgotten, think twice before you open it. Some stories are meant to stay buried. So, what do you think happened to the writer of that diary? Did they escape the darkness, or did they become part of the apartment's sinister history? I still don't have the answers. And honestly, I'm not sure I want them. All I know is this: sometimes, the past reaches out in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes, the stories we uncover aren't just tales, they're warnings. And some places don't want to let go. If you ever find yourself holding a secret like that diary, listen closely to your instincts. Because curiosity can be dangerous, and some doors are better left unopened. Thanks for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales that will keep you up at night. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones that are true.